Yogena chittasya padena vacham malam sharirasya cha vaidyagena yopakarotam pravaram muninam patanjalim pranjaliranatosmi stuve patanjalim vyasam shankaram cha munitrayam katra sutrasya bhashyasya krumat vivaranasya cha. Just a few words by way of introduction, especially meant for those who may be reading the standard published versions of Patanjali's Yoga Sutras. I already mentioned earlier, the standard published versions have a chronological order which is slightly different from what I am following here. You find Samadhipada, Sadhanapada, Vibhudipada and Kaivalyapada. These are the 4 chapters, which means the highest concentration of Samadhi is the central theme, the topic of discussion in the first chapter. The means and methods of practices come later in the next chapter. So perhaps it may be a bit difficult for the beginners to fully follow the method. So I have changed that order a little. I am dealing with some of the very important sutras which explain the basic principles of Patanjali's system of psychology. In the Samadhipada up to 14th sutra. And then I have gone to the second chapter, which deal with some of the important techniques and methods and description of the psychological challenges and problems, and also the methods to confront those problems. Because this is not a formal discussion of a system of philosophy. That's what Patanjali's system was supposed to be, according to conservative traditional scholars. It is one of the 6 orthodox theistic systems of Indian philosophy, which is studied more or less as a traditional conservative part of training. But I am focusing on those aspects which relate Patanjali's system to our own times in the context of problems that we face these days. That's one thing. Second point to remember is, that's why I want to repeat this again, Patanjali's concept of life is totally different from the concept of life in Abrahamic religious traditions. So Patanjali takes it for granted that the students of his system do accept that life is not just one. Life is a continuous cycle. We are born, we live, we die, we are reborn, again to enjoy or suffer the fruits of the results of actions of this life. So in this respect you find is a reversal of the Abrahamic conception of the human soul, which begins at the time of creation. When God created, the soul is created. And then when we die, we go to heaven, and then we live in heaven indefinitely. That is the concept in Abrahamic religious traditions. To appreciate Patanjali's system, we have to keep all this in mind. But according to yoga, the individual soul is eternal. It is perfect. It is of the nature of absolute knowledge, bliss, beauty, everything. It is infinite and eternal. Now, but then why all these problems? It's because it fails to recognize its true nature, which is of the nature of absolute bliss, absolute knowledge, and absolute existence. So, where does this ignorance begin? It doesn't have any beginning. The soul is eternal, so there is no beginning. Just the opposite of the concept of creation which corresponds to the creation of the beginning of human soul in Abrahamic traditions. Now another point. This individual life comes to an end. But individual soul doesn't come to an end. This individual human life, which is based on the wrong notion that we are finite, we are limited, we are bound, we suffer, we enjoy, we are the physical body, nothing more than that. All these wrong notions would come to an end once for all when we recognize our true nature. So the cycle will come to an end. So these are some very important points to keep in mind. The law of karma and the doctrine of rebirth. Every action produces its results. It creates vrittis and samskaras. Samskaras are the residual forms of vrittis which are related to every action that we do. Samskaras are vrittis with a strong orientation towards repetition of the same action if it is pleasant, or avoiding the same action which is if it is unpleasant. And when we live in this world, when we interact with different persons, when we have to confront different problems in our office, in a factory, in professional life, what happens? If the external stimuli is conducive to spiritual life, then this external condition will help us to bring spiritual tendencies, good tendencies, to the top layer of the mental lake. This sentence I shall explain. Mind or mind stuff is conceived to be a lake with different layers. Different layers constituted by different actions, vrittis, tendencies, vasanas, impressions that we accumulated over the last several innumerable lives. When the external circumstances are helpful or conducive to spiritual life, then the accumulated tendencies coming from the lowest layer of the mental lake will come to the surface as units, not individually. That's a very important point. That's why, to give an example, suppose you remember listening to a good lecture or a wonderful meditative experience that you had in a temple or a church or a synagogue, sometime maybe 10 years back. Today you are going to synagogue or a church. You may suddenly remember those experiences. You have not gone to the church for the last 10 years. Today you are entering the church. So all those experiences, not exactly repetition of the experiences, but the memories in the form of memories and tendencies may come to the top layer of the mind stuff. And then what happens? We not only remember the particular event or episode, we also remember the name of the church where we went 10 years back, where we had a wonderful meditative experience. Your companions, your friends, or the clergymen who took you to the church, the bus by which you traveled, the route that you took, the name of the town, maybe the name of the street where the church was located. So all these tendencies and impressions come as a single unit. And this happens the other way too. Bad experiences or undesirable external circumstances can also provoke for these tendencies, bad tendencies that are lying at the lowest layer of the mental lake to come to the surface and may prompt or provoke us, tempt us to do bad things. Just that good memories could help us to continue doing good things, bad memories could tempt us to do bad things. So they come as units, not individually. And these units are called samskaras, vasanas. A particular vasana to do good things. That should be kept in mind. In this context, I was reading, in the last session, I was reading the 33rd sutra of Samadhipada, means first chapter in the printed book, which describes the methods of attaining power of concentration by countering the obstacles. We have to face innumerable obstacles when we enter spiritual life. Patanjali says, that the commentators, that once we become aware of these problems, there are no more problems. The mind automatically evolves defense mechanisms. Of course, in psychiatry, you find mind automatically does this. But in yoga, it is a creative, constructive process. It is a problem-solving process. In psychiatry, it is only an escape, running away from it. That's the main point. So, I shall recapitulate a few points. In one of the earliest sutras, we discussed the psychological problems that one may have to face, which is called antaraya, which is called vyadhis, sthana, samsaya, pramada, alasya, aviradi, bhranti darsana, alabdha bhumigatva, tvani, anavasthidani, chitta vikshepaha, te antarayaha. 9 important psychological problems that any spiritual seeker in her or his life have to confront are listed here. Disease, it being the form of extreme likes and dislikes, which is a really mental disease. And then indecision, languor, carelessness, lethargy, mistaken notion, feeling of heaviness, well, am I really going the right direction? And doubts, all this. We already discussed this subject, but I want you to remember when we enter the next topic, which is closely related to all this. Now, these 9 psychological problems have got 4 external manifestations. Dukkha daumanasya angume jayatva swasa praswasaha vikshepa sahabhuvaha. These are the external manifestations. Pain, despair, shakiness, inspiration, and expiration, all this. We already discussed this subject, so I won't repeat again. Okay, now, how to confront these problems? What are the causes for these 9 psychological distractions or obstacles and their 4 external manifestations? The real background of all these problems is our day-to-day life. Internal mental life and external life. Our feelings, our actions, emotions, impulses, thoughts, etc. And also the problems created by external circumstances, the place, the persons, the events, the episodes that we have to confront. Not all of them may be helpful for spiritual life. Especially in this 33rd sutra, Patanjali is giving a very, very scientific method of confronting these obstacles. Sometimes our reaction, our attitude towards other persons could create internal problems. For example, as I mentioned last time, when we feel unhappy when some of our friends or some of our enemies, those whom we like or those whom we do not like, become happy or unhappy, we may not be able to share their happiness. So when we become unhappy, when our friend is happy, then this unhappiness becomes an obstacle in spiritual life. When our friend is happy, and if we are able to share that happiness within, then what happens? This obstacle is solved. So, and there's here one example. We never become jealous or envious of total strangers. We become jealous of only those whom we know, those in whose company we live, our colleagues. If you are a scientist, you'll become jealous of an Einstein because there is no way for you to catch up with Einstein. You don't become jealous of Hannibal or Duke of Wellington or Napoleon. There is no chance of it. You'll be something wrong with you if you say, well, I'm jealous of Duke of Wellington or Alexander the Great or Einstein. No. You become jealous of only those who are in your own company, more or less belonging to your own status group. Those who are far above you, you don't become jealous. Those who are much inferior to you, far below your state, your level, you don't become jealous. You don't become jealous when a kindergarten boy scores a high grade. So also you don't become jealous when a great world-famous physicist gets a Nobel Prize. If you are a physics professor at one of the universities, you don't become jealous because a great German or some other foreign scientist gets Nobel Prize. But you may become jealous when your own colleague gets a Nobel Prize, those with whom you work. So here Patanjali says, Maitri, Maitri means friendliness, camaraderie. And we comrades, those who belong to our own, more or less our own age group, intellectually, professionally, in achievements, those who are more or less close to our own status. When they become happy, you should be happy. And you should be friendly with them. And those who are not up to your level, those who are somewhat behind you, but those are good people, you should not become indifferent. If you become indifferent, then that indifference could create a kind of emotional disturbance, and that could be an obstacle. That could also become a source of stress. So you should be compassionate. But then there are people whom you cannot change, whose company may not help you in your spiritual life. With such people, you should keep a long distance. Now, Patanjali says, by the cultivation of these characteristics, that means cultivating friendliness towards those who are your colleagues, those who are fellow travelers, compassion, sympathy for those who are behind you, admiration for those who are above you, who attain much higher, who accomplish much higher things than you, and a total indifference towards those who are likely to take you away from your spiritual track. Now, by doing this, Patanjali says, we can achieve that most precious spiritual psychological treasure. It is called Chitta Prasadanam, inner tranquility. It's a word which is very difficult to translate. When you are in a state of mind, you are not perturbed by anything. There's an inner poise, harmony, tranquility, a feeling of inner fulfillment and contentment, which automatically helps you in spiritual life, which automatically counters or which solves all these problems, all these 9 psychological problems and their 4 external manifestations. So Chitta Prasadanam is nothing but the ability to remain in the same state of mental tranquility, harmony, peace. That's the main topic in today's subject. How to attain this Chitta Prasadanam. mind, this tranquil mind, tranquility, harmony, peace, inner joy, which is not related to attaining something worldly, but an inner, subtle spiritual joy. How to achieve this? Now, Vyasa gives a very simple definition for this Chitta Prasadana. Clarity of mind, that is what he calls it. Clarity. Clear-mindedness. Mind becomes clear when there are no cowboys, no disturbance, no wavering, stability, sthiti nibandhini. That's what Vijnana Bhikshu, a great commentator who wrote this, means a kind of perfect stability of mind. Now, one important method to achieve this inner tranquility, serenity, and peace of mind is Ishvara Pranidhana, which Patanjali recommends in the 29th sutra a little earlier. And he says, when you attain this mental tranquility, then there is an awakening of inner spiritual self. Our inner spiritual personality gets awakened. This should be explained. Normally, we all interpret ourselves in terms of psychophysical or psychophysiological experiences. We are a physical being, we are an intellectual being, or mental being. So long, I mentioned this earlier, so long as we define ourselves, we understand ourselves, we look upon ourselves as mere psycho-physical entities, it is impossible to attain Chitta Prasadana, the inner tranquility of mind. Because even we interpret ourselves as a physical being, the slightest, the smallest physical injury can destroy the mental tranquility. When you interpret yourself as an intellectual being, then the slightest intellectual disappointment could disturb the mental tranquility. So there is a higher reality that goes beyond mind and body. When you reach this level, it is called the awakening of the inner self. We immediately realize we are something other than these physical, psychological beings. We connect ourselves to something transcendental. And the moment you are able to link yourself to this transcendental dimension of your own spiritual personality, then physical distractions, physical injury, physical pain, psychological depressions, mental disappointment will not disturb our mental tranquility. If our mental tranquility, peace of mind, stability of mind depend upon physical enjoyment, then physical harm, physical injury, or any disturbance of physical enjoyment could disturb the mental tranquility. That happens when we interpret ourselves as psychological beings also. Now Patanjali says, that Vyasa, the commentator, says, we must link ourselves to this spiritual dimension of our personality. This is what is called awakening of the spiritual dimension of our personality, which is called the term which is normally used, pratyak chetana. Pratyak chetana means the inner self, awakening, going back to our inner self. I mean, elevating ourselves to the spiritual dimension of our personality. When we succeed in awakening this pratyak chetana, then all obstacles vanish. How does this happen? When we are convinced we are the Atman, we are not the physical, psychological mechanism, with this psychophysical mechanism is only an instrument for the Atman to manifest. It is only an entity that may live for 100 years and vanish. In the next life, another psychophysical mechanism may emerge. But this Atman is not destroyed at the time of death. It only takes another psychophysical mechanism. And in its true nature, it is of the nature of bliss, knowledge, and existence absolute. It is never disturbed. So now, when we do this, we are connecting, we are linking ourselves to this transcendental reality. Now, according to many of our commentators of Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, this is achieved by constant remembrance of God, of some spiritual principle. That's we are going to deal with in the next sutras. Now, in the first chapter, Samadhipada, there is a sutra, 23rd sutra, Ishvara Pranidhanat Va. Of course, this is explained in the context of attaining cessation of this misidentification of external objects called yoga chitta vritti nirodha. That is, yoga is nothing but a cessation of our misidentification of our own self with the emerging multiplicity of tendencies and impressions and modifications. This cessation could be achieved by one method, and that is explained here, Ishvara Pranidhana, which means devotion to Ishvara. Ishvara means God. Now, how does Ishvara Pradhana help us? Patanjali describes Ishvara Pranidhana as repetition of a great spiritual idea. It's called a special meditation. Pranidhanat bhakti visheshat avarjita Ishvara tam anugrihnadi abhidhyana matrena. By taking a great spiritual ideal, a sacred mantra, or reading a spiritual work, a hymn, and by getting absorbed in the meaning of that mantra, we can attain this. That's what Patanjali says. And when we achieve this, what happens? Tajjapaha tadartha bhavanam. When we do that, repeating of this sacred mantra, along with the meaning of that mantra, it takes us to the highest spiritual experience. This is one method. I shall explain this elaborately. Suppose we repeat a sacred mantra with its meaning, with mind completely concentrated on the meaning of the mantra. Then what happens? This practice helps us to drive away, to remove all the contrary thought currents from the mental system. This you can even find how this works in ordinary life. If you are always concentrating on one particular ideal, and that ideal is nothing but the meaning of a sacred mantra or a sacred word. It could be any prayer from any religious tradition. The mind constantly dwells on the meaning of that particular word. And when your mind is concentrated on the meaning of that word, the mind evolves a great positive vritti, a great positive tendency of samskara. And that removes, for the time being at least, all the negative thought currents. in the traditional science of repetition of mantra, it's called mantra shastram, it's called in Sanskrit. It's an elaborate science. There are 4 levels of repeating either you Christian psalms or Hindu prayers or any sacred mantra. It should be repeated with the full understanding of the meaning of the word. Because without understanding the full meaning of the word, we won't be able to fully concentrate on the word itself. We cannot fully concentrate on a word if we do not understand the implication of the particular word. When we concentrate on the meaning of the word, the mind goes towards it. This happens at 4 different levels. To give an example, suppose you are traveling in the street, walking in the street, you hear some music, loudspeakers, blurting in loudspeakers, music. This sound is only the most insignificant, either the grossest dimension of the particular speech system. Any word that you hear externally in a loud voice is only the grossest dimension. It goes thulatam, the grossest dimension of that particular word. When you go deeper into the meaning of the word, then you may not hear it the way you hear a word from a big loudspeaker public address system. But you may hear internally. And internal hearing is possible only if you know the meaning. So your mind goes deeper into it. In fact, the grossest dimension of the word or mantra is called Vaikhari. Vaikhari means that which is audible, clearly audible. What is audible, what is heard, is only the grossest dimension. As you understand the meaning, say for example a psalm or a mantra or a sacred word, you mentally repeat it, fully concentrating on the meaning of that particular word. It's called Madhyama. Means it is a second stage in the evolution, in an ascending order. So, Ishvara Pranidhana is possible only if these 2 factors combine, tad japaha, tad artha bhavana. Japa means repetition with great concentration. Artha bhavana means concentrating on the meaning or the implication of the particular word. Vijnada vachya vachakatvasya yoginaha means the one who understands, they understand the connection between the word and its meaning. So according to many commentators of Patanjali Sutras like Vachaspati, Vijnana Bhikshu and others, this particular sutra which I mentioned here, Tajjabas Tadartha Bhavanam, is a description, is an explanation of the process of Ishvara Pranidhana. That means repeating a sacred word which reminds us of God. If, first of all, we may not be able to do it in a subtle way with the full understanding of the meaning. Sometimes, you may read newspaper, and along with that you also read the Bible or Bhagavad Gita or whatever it is. That's better than reading newspaper only without reading Bible. That's better. The grossest dimension. Now, as we go deeper, we understand the meaning, our mind gets more concentrated on the word because our mind gets concentrated on the word, on the meaning of the word. And then we approach closer to the real implication of that particular word. The first Vaikhari, or the grossest repetition, helps us to avoid repeating other things. Suppose you listen to loudspeakers blurting, say, spiritual or maybe the religious music. It is certainly good because it helps you to avoid listening to other things. At the gross level, if you can concentrate on reading good things, listening to good things, you can avoid listening to undesirable things. That's the one purpose. It means our mind is slowly drawn away from the undesirable and drawn towards the desirable. Mind is withdrawn gradually from the undesirable things and drawn towards the desirable spiritual ideas. And then the mind goes deeper, the mind understands the meaning and starts concentrating on the meaning of the word. At the third stage called Pashyanti, the third higher stage, where going beyond just concentrating on the meaning, we try to understand and try to fully grasp and become identified with the true essence of that prayer. That is Pashyanti. At the highest level, we become fully identified with that prayer. We become one with it. Our individual self completely merges with the spiritual essence of that holy sound, holy word, or psalms, or prayer, or whatever it is. So, the repetition of the sacred word, which somehow takes the mind towards God, slowly takes us towards God experience. That's how this Pratyak Chetana takes place, awakening of the inner spiritual self. As we proceed further, as we evolve in this direction, slowly all obstacles get dissolved. The mind develops a counter system which automatically filters away undesirable thought currents, undesirable tendencies, undesirable ideas. That's the real purpose of Ishvara Pranidhana. And once we achieve this, what happens? All these obstacles that we described earlier will vanish. Vyadhi, Sthyana, Samsaya, Pramada, Alasya, Aviradi, Bhranti Darshana, Alabdha Bhumigatva, Anavasthitattvani, Chitta Vikshepa. Means all these antaraya means obstacles, distractions. Disease, languor, indecision, carelessness, lethargy, laziness, self-doubt, sloth, sometimes the deeper, the latent urges and tendencies at the lower layers of the mind stuff coming to the surface and prompting us towards wrong actions and wrong words, and thereby taking us away from the path of yoga. All these obstacles can be solved through this process of Ishvara Pranidhana. At the grossest level, first of all, it helps us to withdraw the five senses of perception and mind away from undesirable objects. See, if you make it a point to listen to spiritual music, it may not immediately help us to concentrate on the meaning of that music. But at least what happens, it could help us to avoid listening to unspiritual music, which can create more distraction, more anxiety, and more problems. There are many kinds of music which can rather take us, because if they do not fully succeed in running us crazy, then it is a great miracle. So, unspiritual music can certainly destroy the tranquility of mind. So spiritual music, spiritual sound system, spiritual speech system, that's called Vaikhari, the audible things. So first, it withdraws the five senses and mind away from undesirable objects. And then, Madhyama level, at the next higher level, it helps us to concentrate on the desirable spiritual ideal. The third level, it helps us to become identified with the spiritual ideal. At the fourth level, it helps us to get fully merged on this ideal. You find these four levels of evolution in all mystical traditions of all religions. Wherever whichever religion has produced great mystics and saints, you find they all reach the last stage, means para stage, where they become fully identified with the ideal which they were practicing. At that level, what happens? We feel, not just believe, we feel the presence of God in all beings, and we feel the presence of the whole creation in God. In one of our classical books, the Bhagavata Purana, there is a description of 3 levels of evolution in devotional life. We were so far discussing the 4 levels of evolution in the practice of mantra japa, repetition of mantras, repetition of sacred word. That is para, pasyanti, madhyama, vaikhari. Para is the highest, pasyanti is next lower level, madhyama is the 3rd level, and vaikhari is the beginning, the grossest level. Now, this happens even without the practice of Patanjali system of yoga. Even if you surrender yourself to God, then also this happens. Ishvara Pranidhana means surrendering oneself to God. Once we really do that, then every prayer becomes a repetition of the same experience. Then prayer or confession doesn't become a license renewal ceremony, where once we confess and then we can continue the same thing. No, the real prayer it completely transforms our life into a spiritual pilgrimage. So these 3 levels are very interesting. This Bhagavata Purana says, at the highest level, the devotee feels his presence and the presence of the whole creation in God, and the presence of God in the whole creation. Sarva bhudeshu ye pasyet bhagavad bhavam atmanaha bhudani bhagavadi atmani esha bhagavadottamaha. It's a definition of Bhagavadottama. Who is the highest devotee of God? That's the subject of discussion. It comes in the Bhagavata Purana, in the 11th skandha, 11th book. There is an interesting discussion between a great king and 9 sages who happened to visit him on his palace. 9 sages. Kabir Hari Andariksha Prabuddha Pipalayana Avihotrodhabhusha Chamasa Karabhajanaha. There are 9 great sages who happened to visit a great emperor, a King Nimi. And when they visited him in his palace, this king puts 9 questions to these sages. It's called Navayogi, means 9 sages. 9 great yogis are visiting a king. Yogis who have reached the highest experience level of yoga. And the king puts each question to each of the 9 sages, and they answer one after another. One of the 9 sages, his name was Andariksha. Now, one question that is put to the sages is this: what are the characteristics of an ideal yogi, an ideal devotee? So, in answer to this question, the great sage, his name was Antariksha, said, the highest devotee is the one who feels the presence of God everywhere and the presence of the whole creation in God. So the sloka is this: Sarva bhudeshu ye pasyet bhagavat bhavam atmanaha bhudani bhagavadi atmani esha bhagavatottamaha. This is the stage of the highest devotee. The second stage is more important, relevant in this context. The second sloka is this, the second verse. It describes the condition of those who have not reached the highest evolution, the highest stage in spiritual evolution. Those who are seekers, those who are practitioners, those who are interested in spiritual life, those who meditate, they pray, but still in the process of moving towards the highest ideal, not yet reached there. The sage says there is the devotee belongs to the intermediary stage. Ishvare tad adhineshu balisheshu disutsucha prema maitri kripa ubeksha yakkarodi samadhyamaha. This is the verse that translated in English. It is practically a repetition of the same sutra which Patanjali says. Patanjali gives the 33rd sutra of Samadhipada. Those who are devoted to God, be friendly with them. Because mutual exchange of ideas among spiritual seekers will enrich everyone. So you should be friendly, you should move along with fellow spiritual pilgrims, fellow spiritual seekers. Then there are those who are ignorant but would like to know about higher spiritual truths. Be compassionate. And then there are those who are much more highly evolved. You should respect them. There are those who may take you away from your spiritual path. You must be indifferent towards them. Same idea you find here. So, once we are able to evolve such a spiritual filtering mechanism within our own mind, then we can live in this world, we can carry on our duties and responsibilities, we can interact with people, but still mentally we'll be able to live with everyone, move with everyone, without any confrontation, without any conflict. So, because we'll be able to learn from everyone, and every interaction becomes an enriching process. Once we are able to evolve a kind of spiritual filtering mechanism by practicing these virtues. That's what Patanjali means here. So we will have interaction now. We will have about 10 minutes, maybe less than 10 minutes. So any general interaction, any questions? No. Patanjali system is a little different, I hope. Patanjali system says there is an end. The moment we realize our true nature, this bondage, all this will come to an end. But it's beginningless, but with an end. Because this bondage is really unreal. Bondage is not real. It is ignorance, our lack of awareness of our own true nature. That's the idea behind. Yes. Even the Christian tradition, the ideal, the definition of the highest Christian experience, according to Origen, many theologians, comes very close to what Vedanta and Yoga explains at the higher transcendental experience. But at the theological level, you find there are always differences between different traditions. Theological level is not the highest. The experience level is the highest. At that level, you don't find many differences. Theological levels are mostly determined by the customs, the intellectual culture in which each tradition is born and interpreted. So there are always differences at the level of mythology, ceremonies, and theology. At the level of philosophy, there are similarities. But at the level of the highest experience, there is no distinction. That's the idea behind it.
You mentioned that we carry over the experiences that we have in our past lives
Yeah.
to the current lives. But when you say there is no beginning, then how do we know that where is the beginning in terms of how did we become?
Yes. Atman or Atma in the self, in its true nature, is beginningless. When we use the word individual soul, the individual soul is only an imagined and non-actual, non-real concept. The Atman is one. So there are several examples. The sun reflecting through different media may reflect in different ways depending upon the medium on which it reflects. So our minds, our actions, our tendencies, all these constitute the internal organs which is called antakarana, which are subtle personality. That is different. Once we break out of this subtle personality, then we won't make much distinction between the one undivided universal Atman, self, that is Paramatma, and the Jivatma, the individual dimension of self. It is only an imagined something. Another example I can give. You see, you can't say that the reflection is totally unreal from the sun, because the reflection resembles the sun, but the reflection is not actually the sun. Without the sun, there can be no reflection. What is reflection? Reflection of the sun is nothing but what you see in water which is collected in a pot. You collect water in a pot and place it under the sun. The sun is reflected. So there is similarity, but it's not the same thing. Once you break the pot, once the water is gone, only the sun remains. Sun is like Paramatman, reflections are the Jivatma. So when we practice prayer, when we practice meditation, when we practice yoga, when we do spiritual practices, it's like breaking the pot and removing the water. So the union of the individual self with the universal self, that's the goal of yoga. So this individuality is an imagined, unreal thing. Our true individuality is that we are one universal reality. But then we bring a pot, we pour water, and then the reflection is kept. A mirror image, same. There is a similarity, but they are not the same. Take a pot, an empty pot for it. There is space within the pot, there is space outside the pot. But we can say for the time being, we can say that space, the shape of the space within the pot takes the form of the pot. But it is only an imagine. You break it, it merges with the universal reality. The Mahakasha, as we call it. So all spiritual practices are an attempt to go back to our real personality, real individuality. Our real individuality is that we are not individuals, we are the universal. Yes.
I agree. And that's what we are trying to get to, right? And that's what we
Yeah.
to get to. But then why did we purposefully choose
Yes, that's why life, why first of all there should be a problem in this world? You can ask him, why should there be creation? If you ask the word, why there is a creation, Vedanta gives only one answer. And the answer is, it is an inexplicable sport of the Lord. Now, why should you play? You don't play with a purpose. You don't say that God sits somewhere and creates this world. Vedanta tries to trace the effect to its cause. Why this world? Look around this world. See this plurality, the multiplicity. What's the nature of the world? And as you go back in search of a cause for this creation, then finally you understand this creation is nothing but a relative entity. Relative means that which belongs to time, that is born in time, that lives in time, and for that very reason which may vanish in time. So this relative is only a relative reading, a relative interpretation of the absolute. When you read the absolute through the prism of time, space and causation, you have got this created world. You have got these individual beings. Through experience, when we realize that this universe, including our own psychophysical mechanism, all are relative. It's a relative thing. As an intellectual concept, everyone in this world does understand the cosmos, the universe itself is something relative. Relative means that which is subject to change, which doesn't remain the same way in the past, present and future. So this changeable relative phenomena is only an incomplete reading, an incomplete understanding of the perfect reality, which is Atman. So Vedanta doesn't tell you that God created this world on a fine day. What Vedanta does is, you look around, see the rivers, mountains, valleys, where do they come from? And you analyze. And then you understand, well, they did not exist before maybe the Big Bang. And they may not exist after several millions of years again. That means they are relative. If this is relative, relativity itself is inconceivable without the background of an absolute, non-relative. Change cannot be understood or conceived without positing a changeless thing. Movement cannot be understood without positing something which is not moving. So if this world is relative, then what was there in the so-called world before the world came into existence? So Vedanta says, this absolute reality is one unborn and for that very reason deathless, infinite truth. That's our nature. But then the difference between a person who has realized this truth and a person who lives in this world, who thinks I am this body, nothing more, is this. They all eat the same food, breathe the same air. But behind all this, the realized person understands that these things are subject to change. Everyone understands but not willing to accept. Everyone, any intelligent, any student studying in any primary school will tell you that this world is subject to change. Even kindergarten boys know that. But then, we are not willing to translate that truth which every physicist accepts into spiritual philosophy. When we come to spiritual philosophy, then we want to say God sits somewhere and say, no, let there be world. I tell you, such ideas are found in the popular mythological Hinduism, Hindu scriptures. But Vedanta, the Upanishads don't accept it. Upanishad says, that is true, that is only a partial, incomplete understanding. Not that it is wrong, no. You can't say something is wrong. It is only an incomplete, a partial understanding of the whole picture. That's not the whole picture, that's all. As we evolve in spiritual life, the picture changes. Our understanding of the absolute reality also evolves, becomes more and more complete as we evolve in spiritual life. That's why I gave you two verses. The third verse in the Bhagavad Purana says, the lowest level, those who are beginners in spiritual life, this classic doesn't condemn them. They say, but they are also studying. They are studying only in kindergarten. Nothing wrong in studying in kindergarten. Like that, this text says, this great sage says, the highest spiritual person is one who sees God everywhere and who sees everything in God. And then there are those who are only trying to reach this experience. They have to be careful. They should be friendly towards fellow spiritual seekers. They're compassionate towards those who want to know spirituality. Should not hate them, but be very careful when dealing with those who may take you away from your track. Then there is a description of those who belong the most primitive, not wrong, but primitive level of spiritual evolution. Those who are studying the kindergarten of spirituality. He says, Archayam eva haraye pujam cha saddhaye hade nacha tad bhakteshu channeshu yak karodi sa prakritaka. Prakrita means the beginner, the one who has just started spiritual life. Well, they believe my God lives in my temple. My God is happy when I read this book. He is unhappy, angry when I don't read this book, when I don't perform these particular rituals. So that's the beginning. As we evolve further, we think God is everywhere. So there are two types of evolution. The evolution at the level of the spiritual seeker and the evolution at the level of the concept of the absolute reality. That's why Vedanta never says anything is wrong. No. Vivekananda in modern times, he said, we are not traveling from error to truth, but we are traveling from truth that is lower. Lower here means incomplete. From truth that's lower to truth that's higher. From an incomplete truth, we are evolving to a more complete understanding of the reality. That's why I said, at the experience level, you find great mystics in all traditions who had reached this experience. They transcend the limitations of philosophy, theology, ritual, ceremonies, and so on. That's it. So, Om Shanti 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 Hari Om Tat Sat Sri Ramakrishna Arpanamastu.